Everything you've been taught about the American frontier is backwards. The men who were called liars, lunatics, and primitive savages, the ones educated officers openly mocked, the ones Congress refused to believe, were right every single time. They described a place where the earth boiled and shot water 100 feet into the air, and the newspapers refused to print it. They warned that a military column would be wiped out to the last man, and the colonel laughed in their faces. They told a wagon party exactly which mountain pass would kill them, and the wagon party ignored them. 41 people died. The mountain men of the American West weren't crazy. They were the most empirically educated human beings on the continent, and what they knew, what was ripped away from the American memory, should have never been forgotten. Picture Jim Bridger in 1856. He's 52 years old, sun-cracked, barely literate, wearing buckskin so worn it's nearly translucent at the elbows. He's sitting across a table from a journalist at Fort Laramie, and he is describing, in plain and careful language, a place where hot water shoots from the ground, taller than a 4-story building, where pools of deep blue water bubble at temperatures that would cook a man alive, where a mountain is made entirely of black glass, and where, and he leans forward here, because this is the part that always gets him, you can catch a fish in a cold mountain lake and cook it in the boiling spring on your way back up without ever taking it off the line. The journalist wrote the story down. Then he killed it. He told his editor the Kansas City Journal could not afford to be, quote, laughed out of town for believing old Jim Bridger's lies. What did Bridger know that the journalist didn't? Everything. He knew because he had been there. He had stood in it. He smelled the sulfur, watched the geysers fire on their invisible clocks, touched the obsidian of that glass mountain with his own scarred hands. He had a map of the entire American West stored in his skull. A map so precise that U.S. Army General Grenville Dodge later wrote that Bridger could draw it on a buffalo skin with charcoal, and it was more reliable than anything the Army Corps of topographers produced with their instruments. So, what changed? Why did the men who knew the most get dismissed the hardest? And what did we lose when we stopped listening to them? Here's what I want to know before we go any further. Have you ever been the person in the room who actually knew the answer from real experience, from real observation, and got overruled by someone with a better title and worse information? Drop it in the comments. Because what you're about to discover will change how you see expertise, authority, and the staggering cost of dismissing people who've actually done the thing. We have been taught that expertise flows from credentials, that the man with the commission, the uniform, the university degree, and the institutional backing is the reliable one, that the rough-edged, unschooled outsider, the one who learned by surviving rather than by studying, is the unreliable one. His observations are anecdotal. His knowledge is primitive. His warnings are superstition. That is the system. And that system, applied to the American frontier in the 19th century, killed hundreds of people who would otherwise have lived, triggered wars that lasted decades and didn't need to happen, and erased geographical knowledge that took generations to recover. The military officer trusted his West Point training over Jim Bridger's 30 years of direct observation. The expedition leader trusted a pamphlet over the guide who had personally walked every mile of the terrain. The government trusted a senator's political calculus over a seasoned diplomat who had negotiated directly with the people involved. The result, in each case, was catastrophe, and in each case, the mountain man's warning was right. Here's where it gets important. This wasn't a fluke. It was a pattern. It happened over and over again, across decades, with different men, in different places, with the same outcome every time. The man who'd been there was wrong in the conference room and right on the ground. Every single time, the antagonist here isn't a person. It's a structure, the institutional assumption that formal authority equals superior knowledge, and that lived, embodied, experiential expertise doesn't count unless it's been validated by the right institutions. The mountain men weren't dismissed because they were wrong. They were dismissed because they didn't look right. They were too dirty, too rough, too unlettered. too comfortable with native people, too at home in a wilderness that terrified the men deciding their credibility. And here's the part that should make you angry. The people doing the dismissing knew on some level that they were outmatched. Major James Van Vost didn't just casually ignore Jim Bridger's intelligence report about the Lakota war camps. He explicitly said, "I do not believe much of what Mr. Bridger says. He exaggerates about Indians." He had never spent a winter with the Crow. He had never ridden the Powder River country. He had never had to read the movements of 1,000 warriors through the pattern of disturbed grass and the behavior of horses at a creek crossing. Bridger had done all of that for 30 years. Van Vost had his rank. You were not broken for having trusted the wrong experts. You were given a system that systematically elevated credentials over competence. The failure was never yours. The failure was built in. Layer 1, the Yellowstone Conspiracy of Disbelief. John Coulter left the Lewis and Clark expedition in 1806 and spent the following years exploring alone. In the winter of 1807 to 1808, he made a solo circuit of approximately 500 miles through what is now Wyoming and Montana, wearing snowshoes, carrying a 30-pound pack, in temperatures reaching 30 below zero. He came back describing geysers, hot springs, or sulfurous mud pools and steaming rivers. He described it with precision. He described the same features that Jim Bridger would later describe, and that Osborne Russell would document in his meticulous journal starting in 1834. A journal so accurate that modern researchers have used it as a field guide to retrace his exact routes. People called it Coulter's Hell. They meant it as an insult. For 40 years, every man who confirmed these descriptions was dismissed as a liar. Joe Meek described the geothermal features in the 1840s. Same reaction. Multiple mountain men independently, without coordinating, described the same impossible landscape. The very consistency of their accounts was used against them. Clearly, they were all repeating the same tall tale. Then, the Hayden Geological Survey arrived in 1871, accompanied by photographer William Henry Jackson. The photographs did what 40 years of first-hand testimony could not. The Congress established Yellowstone National Park on March 1, 1872. And in 1879, the Kansas City Journal, the same paper that killed the Bridger story 23 years earlier, published a formal, printed apology to Jim Bridger. He was 75 years old. He had been right since he was 21. If you're finding this valuable, hit the like button right now, because we're just getting started. Layer 2, Hugh Glass and the Impossible Crawl. On August 23, 1823, Hugh Glass surprised a grizzly bear with cubs on the banks of the Grand River in what is now South Dakota. The bear tore his back open to the ribs, punctured his throat to expose the windpipe, broke his leg, and tore the scalp from his skull. Every experienced trapper in Major Henry's party looked at him and made the same clinical assessment. He would be dead before morning. 2 men were left to watch him die, including a 19-year-old Jim Bridger. After 5 days, with Glass still somehow breathing and the Arikara still threatening, they made the decision every reasonable person in that situation might make. They took his weapons, his fire kit, his knife, and they left. They reported to the party that he had died. Glass regained consciousness alone, unarmed, 250 miles from the nearest outpost, Fort Kiowa on the Missouri River, with mortal wounds and a broken leg, and he started crawling. He set his own broken leg. He packed his wounds with mud to keep the flies out and reportedly allowed maggots to eat the infected tissue, a technique that doctors now call maggot debridement therapy and use in hospitals worldwide. He ate insects, roots, berries, and the leavings of wolf kills. He floated sections of the Missouri on improvised rafts. 6 weeks later, in mid-October 1823, he walked into Fort Kiowa. Everyone had declared him dead. He had declared otherwise. The mechanism here isn't mysterious, though it is remarkable. The mountain men lived in an environment where catastrophic injury was routine. Their relationship to pain, to wound management, to the body's capacity for survival was built from direct and repeated experience. Glass didn't survive despite his primitive existence. He survived because of it. Modern emergency medicine now recognizes that many of the wound management instincts developed by frontier trappers through hard experience, keeping wounds clean, while avoiding unnecessary cutting, allowing the body's own processes to work, were correct. The 19th century professional alternative was mercury compounds, aggressive bleeding, and surgical amputation. Glass's instincts were better medicine. Layer 3. Jim Bridger warns about the Fetterman Massacre. Layer 3. Jim Bridger warns about the Fetterman Massacre. Nobody listens. 81 men die. By 1866, Jim Bridger was serving as scout at Fort Phil Kearny in Wyoming's Powder River Country during Red Cloud's War. He had been operating in that exact territory for 40 years. He had relationships with the Crow Scouts who rode the region. He received intelligence that it took half a day on horseback to ride through the encampments of Red Cloud's allied forces along the Tongue River. Half a day. That is an enormous number of warriors. That is not a raiding party. That is an army. Bridger brought this to the command. Major Van Voost's recorded response: "I do not believe much of what Mr. Bridger says. He exaggerates about Indians." Captain William Fetterman, fresh from Civil War distinction and contemptuous of frontier warfare, stated openly that he could take 80 men and ride to the Tongue River. Bridger told him directly, "Your men who fought down south are crazy. They don't know anything about fighting Indians." On December 21, 1866, Fetterman led 81 men in pursuit of a decoy party. Crazy Horse led them across Lodge Trail Ridge. Somewhere between 1,500 and 2,000 warriors were waiting. Every soldier was killed. It remains the worst U.S. Army disaster on the Great Plains until the Little Bighorn a decade later. By 1868, the Army abandoned all 3 Bozeman Trail forts. The government signed a treaty giving the Lakota essentially everything they had demanded. Bridger had been exactly, precisely, catastrophically right. Layer 4. James Clyman tells the Donner Party where not to go. They go there anyway. 41 people die. James Clyman is one of the most experienced frontiersmen alive in 1846. He was a member of Ashley's Hundred, the elite fur brigade of the early 1820s. He was part of the team that rediscovered South Pass, the gateway through the Rockies that would eventually carry over 400,000 pioneers west. He once personally sewed Jedediah Smith's scalp back onto his skull after a grizzly attack, using a needle and thread in the field with no anesthetic. He served in the Black Hawk War of 1832, alongside a tall young lawyer from Illinois named Abraham Lincoln. In the spring of 1846, Clyman tested the Hastings Cutoff, traveling eastward from California. It took 25 days on horseback, through brutal terrain, with significant suffering. He arrived at Fort Laramie in early July 1846, and he ran into his old war comrade, James Fraser Reed, who was traveling west with the Donner Reed wagon party. De Clyman's warning was plain and specific. Take the regular wagon track, never leave it. It is barely possible to get through if you follow it, and it may be impossible if you don't. Reed dismissed him. There was a nearer route, Reed said. No need for such a roundabout course. The Donner Party of 87 people took the Hastings Cutoff on July 31, 1846. The shortcut cost them 18 extra days in the Wasatch Mountains alone. The Great Salt Lake Desert crossing took 5 days instead of the 2 Hastings had promised. They arrived at the Sierra Nevada weeks behind schedule. The first heavy snow hit on October 28th at Truckee Lake. 41 of 87 people died. Survivors consumed the dead. Historian Richard Rhodes concluded that if the Donner Party had listened to Clyman, they would have reached California in mid-September, the same time as most other immigrants that year. Layer 5. Old Bill Williams. De Thomas Fitzpatrick and the cost of diplomatic wisdom ignored. Bill Williams, born 1787, raised on the Missouri frontier, multilingual in Osage, Navajo, Ute, French, and Spanish, a man who created a 2,000-word Osage English dictionary, served as guide on John C. Fremont's disastrous 4th expedition in the winter of 1848 to 1849. When the party reached the San Luis Valley, Williams insisted on Cochetopa Pass, which he knew from years of travel with the Ute. Fremont overruled him and fired him as guide. By Christmas Day, 1848, the 35-man party was stranded in the La Garita Mountains. All 120 mules froze to death. 10 or 11 men died of cold and starvation. Some survivors ate the dead. Fremont wrote to his wife blaming Williams entirely. Mountain historians have largely rejected that assessment. The route Williams recommended was used by later surveys. The Transcontinental Railroad was never built on Fremont's chosen path. It was never built there because it couldn't be. Thomas Broken Hand Fitzpatrick, co-discoverer of South Pass, guide to the first emigrant wagon trains on the Oregon Trail, became Indian agent for the Upper Platte and Arkansas in 1846. In 1851, he convened the largest Native American council ever held in the American West at Horse Creek near Fort Laramie. Roughly 10,000 members of the Sioux, Cheyenne, Arapaho, Crow, Ai, and other nations. He negotiated a treaty guaranteeing peace in exchange for $50,000 in annual goods for 50 years. The U.S. Senate unilaterally cut that annuity period to 15 years. Fitzpatrick warned that broken promises would lead to war. He was still in Washington, trying to get the government to honor its commitments when he died in 1854, buried in an unmarked grave. The shattered treaty contributed to the Sand Creek Massacre in 1864, to Red Cloud's War from 1866 to 1868, to the Great Sioux War of 1876. Fitzpatrick had been right. The Cheyenne and Arapaho chiefs who outlived him called him the one fair agent their peoples ever had, a judgment made meaningful by every fraud and betrayal that followed. Layer 6. Jim Beckwourth and the lowest mountain pass in the Sierra Nevada. Jim Beckwourth, born around 1798, the son of a Virginia plantation owner and an enslaved woman, spent decades as a mountain man, trapper, and Crow warrior chief. For over a century after his 1856 autobiography was published, historians dismissed it as fabrication. The racism shaping that dismissal was transparent. He was a black man making remarkable claims, which clearly meant, to those historians, that he was lying. In 1972, historian Eleanor Wilson's meticulous biography systematically verified his accounts. The Missouri Encyclopedia now confirms that modern historical research has demonstrated his recollections were for the most part factual. His most tangible legacy requires no biography to confirm. In 1850, Beckwourth discovered a passage through the Sierra Nevada that stands at 5,221 feet, the lowest pass in the entire range. He guided the first wagon train through it in 1851. California, State Route 70 runs through it today. So does the Union Pacific Railroad, which uses it as an alternate route when Donner Pass is closed by winter storms. You may have driven on it. You may have shipped packages that traveled through it, every one of them a quiet, ongoing vindication. Here's the final piece of the mystery. Why was this knowledge dismissed, and why was it eventually lost? 3 reasons, and they compound each other. The first is speed. The mountain man's expertise was slow built, decades of direct experience, season after season in the same terrain. There was no shortcut to it. You couldn't learn it in a classroom or acquire it with a commission. The Army needed officers it could deploy in months, not decades. The second is cost. An illiterate trapper who knew more than a colonel was an administrative inconvenience of the highest order. Every time a mountain man was proven right and an officer was proven wrong, it destabilized the entire premise of military hierarchy. It was cheaper, institutionally, to dismiss the trapper than to redesign the command structure around him. The third is a new technology that made old knowledge seem unnecessary. The transcontinental telegraph arrived in 1861. Detailed maps followed. Photography arrived at Yellowstone in 1871. Once the institutions could capture and transmit knowledge through their own systems, the embodied knowledge held by individual men became invisible to them. They had their photographs. They no longer needed the man who had walked every inch of what the photograph showed. The hidden cost, they lost something that photographs couldn't capture: the feel of the terrain, the behavior of the animals, the 30 years worth of pattern recognition that told a man the difference between a storm that would pass by morning and one that would kill you if you camped in the wrong canyon. That knowledge died with the men who held it, and the wars, the disasters, and the missed routes all came in the years when that knowledge was dismissed rather than honored. So what do you do with this? 3 things, ordered from easiest to most involved. The first is the simplest. Read the primary sources. Osborne Russell's Journal of a Trapper, published from diaries written between 1834 and 1843, is available in print and in digital archives right now. It is one of the most precise field accounts of American wilderness ever written. James Clyman's diaries are collected and published. Fitzpatrick's reports to the Bureau of Indian Affairs are in the historical record. These are not second-hand accounts. They are the direct testimony of men who were there, preserved in their own words, waiting for anyone willing to read them without deciding in advance that they're lying. The second is harder, but more rewarding. Learn to recognize embodied expertise in your own life. The mountain man's knowledge was empirical. It was built from consequence. Every decision he made about weather, terrain, or tactics was tested against reality, and if he got it wrong, he died. That is a different quality of knowledge than theoretical knowledge. Find the people in your field, your community, your family, who have that kind of knowledge, built from years of direct engagement with real consequences, and listen to them harder than you listen to the credentialed. The third option, so the minimum viable act, and is this: the next time you hear someone dismiss firsthand experience in favor of institutional authority, notice it. Just notice it. Notice when the person who has actually done the thing gets overruled by the person who has only studied the thing. Notice what you trust and why. That noticing is where everything starts. Jim Bridger, John Coulter, Hugh Glass, James Clyman, Thomas Fitzpatrick, Bill Williams, Jim Beckworth. These were not primitive men. They were master engineers of the most demanding environment on the continent. Men who built their knowledge the only honest way knowledge gets built. By living inside the thing they were trying to understand for decades at the cost of their comfort and often their blood. The knowledge wasn't lost. It was overruled, dismissed, buried under the assumption that the man with the title knew more than the man with the scar. We are digging up exactly this kind of knowledge. The expertise that got dismissed, the warnings that were ignored, the systems that worked before they were replaced by things that didn't, right here on this channel. If that's something you want more of, subscribe and tell us in the comments what you think we should investigate next. What knowledge do you think got buried? What did the people who were called crazy turn out to be right about? We want to know.